going to start with the QB needy teams. So 32 teams in the NFL, but definitely all of them don't need quarterbacks. So I kind of did this exercise. I'm sure you did as well. But at the current moment, given the rumors, the trades, the Staffords, the things, the weird stuff, how many teams right now need a quarterback? So I'll let you start. Where's your head at in this discussion?
I count 9 teams. So
Okay.
I think Tennessee, Cleveland, Giants, those are the top 3. Vegas at 6, the Jets at 7, the Saints at 9, Pittsburgh, I count them. And then not everyone will agree. I say the Indianapolis Colts need a quarterback as well. And then the Rams would be that 9th team if Matthew Stafford got traded. Where's your count?
Yeah, so we agree on I'll go AFC first. Jets, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Tennessee, Vegas are, I think, the easy 5. And then after that, I tend to agree with you with Indy. They were on my list. They're talking about bringing in a veteran anyway. So I think there is like competition aspects of that quarterback room. And then the one I wrote down, which is definitely not true now, but I feel like they're thinking about what's next, is Miami. 2 is the guy at the moment, but I feel like I also wanted to write down on this list if I thought a team was going to get overwhelmed and they were willing to maybe do something we weren't seeing, I put a ... in another team, and that was Miami. NFC, Giants. So I think Minnesota's on the list just because I think they're deciding on what to do. I think they probably have their quarterback, but I think there's some decisions to be made there. New Orleans, and then the Rams are kind of deciding what to do in one sense because they're deciding to get rid of Stafford. So it would basically kind of create an opening. And that's kind of it. Like the other ones I had on my list, I don't really think kind of involve themselves in this conversation, which would be like a Seattle and a Dallas, because I think they're both very settled with Geno and Dak, at least for this year. So I think that conversation's a bit aside. So that's the way I broke it down. But I do think what's interesting is it's kind of all the teams that we mentioned. I don't think any of them are less than like 30-1 to win the Super Bowl. So it's really a take your shot of these long shots here.
Yeah, and I know you've done some great work kind of looking at, and we'll probably talk about this a little more in depth, but there's kind of a cutoff even to what teams are true contenders for the Super Bowl. I think it's around like 12-1 or something, and these odds could obviously change, but I think the only teams that you could see even jumping into that list if they have a great offseason would be probably of the ones that we mentioned would be the Rams and yeah, I mentioned Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh potentially. But the thing about the AFC, when you're looking for Super Bowl odds, I never really get excited because I'm like, all right, if a team could, like, let's say if the Commanders are in the AFC, I mean, you still have to get past, Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Burrow. I mean, it's just so tough. And, the Texans, now they fired Slowick. Maybe they bounce back if they, can get a couple of guys who can block for CJ. Like there's like a line, a waiting a line in the AFC, whereas in the NFC, you could see a team like Washington ascend from like first to the NFC, or the last to the NFC Championship game because there's just not as much competition, and one team like the Niners suffers a lot of injuries that leaves like one or two true contenders, and then one of them gets upset, and next thing you have like a Washington on the precipice of a Super Bowl. So I think the NFC is generally where I look at just. I kind of pay more attention to these NFC teams, and that would be so the Rams kind of stick out there because it's kind of tough to see what their thinking would be if they move on from Stafford because there's not that many options out there for them that would make them better than they were with Stafford. But their team, like I like the way their defense developed. They obviously have talent on the offensive side and a great coach who's been there and done that a couple of times. So the Rams would be a team I'm watching. If they could, if depending on, even if Stafford comes back, I thought he looked pretty good down the stretch, but maybe they're trying to get ahead of this. So interesting to see what happens with the Rams.
Yeah, I think the Rams are the right call. I see them 32-1 right now. I also think there's probably a Cooper Kupp gets traded. Everyone thinks it means something, and that goes to 35-1, 30. So like I feel like there's still like a potential bump up before something major happens in that team that you could even wait it out a tiny bit. The other one again is Minnesota, also at 32-1. I do feel like whatever is going to happen there, yeah. maybe the hardest division we've ever seen in our lives, but I'm staying in the NFC and believing that like the overall collection of talent on that team is still worthy of somewhat in that slot. The crazy thing is, and you mentioned with the NFC, AFC, you don't hit another AFC team. Miami's 42-1, but Pittsburgh's at 80-1. So that is really like that is really the next one you hit on this list, which kind of tells to your point that like the NFC is one injury away, and you don't know what the Lions are going to be in that slot. So I do feel like that is the conference of opportunity, I'll call it. You have a team at the bottom here in red, which I actually thought about as well. They are one of the longer odds, but they're in the NFC. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, so the Giants, I think, when you're talking about just teams that need a quarterback, we saw Washington, what they did last year. We know that no team wins the NFC East twice in a row. So Philly, watch out. You're going to get a whole bunch of Niners injury or something. I'm just kidding. I think they still have the best roster in probably the league. But you look at the Giants, I think that's the team that could ascend the most quickly if they get a quarterback, because you look at the Giants, if they get a quarterback, they have a coach that, I know he was maligned in Brian Daboll, but still an offensive-minded coach that's worked with some good quarterbacks. So I think it wouldn't be like a Caleb Williams and Eberflus situation. You'd actually have an offensive coach. You'd feel good about that. And like we saw it with the Commanders, a lot of those holes on the roster can go away, or at least, that they look like holes. They can go away if you have a quarterback and, you kind of piece it together with some veterans. The offensive line for the Giants, if Andrew Thomas is healthy, and it might not be as bad as it's been in past years. I think they cobbled together decent play down the stretch, even without him at times. They still got some guys on that defensive line. They do have holes in the secondary, but again, so did a team like Washington. So I do think the Giants are interesting, but the thing that holds me back on really ever investing into the Giants is I just have no respect for their ownership. I think their ownership is one of those ownership groups that just meddles, and that's to kind of blame for the lack of success that the Giants have had over the years, even when at times they have been kind of a trendy pick to, ascend quickly or get back to where they were. So the Giants are, I think, if you're just saying who could ascend quickly, the Giants do stand out. Let's say Shador turns into a Jaden Daniels type level talent. I'm not saying I'm just saying you never know. Like you can't. Nothing's a certainty, but
it's what you're betting on.
Right. Yeah. The Giants with the right quarterback, you would be surprised how quick they could ascend. But at the same time, be aware that the Giants have one of the worst ownership groups, if not the worst, in the NFL. Maybe they're not looking at Madden ratings. Maybe they should be looking at Madden ratings. That's how bad they are at times.
But to say to your point, the Giants, I believe, were close to like 300 or 400-1. They're down to 200-1. But you look at the Super Bowl odds in terms of just the NFC, Giants at 200-1, then it's New Orleans at 120-1, and then you get to Dallas at 55-1. That's it. Like in terms of actual shots that are really long in that conference, I think there's something there. Now, obviously 300, 400s are a better number. You could shop out there, but I kind of like the roster. Obviously, Neighbors is a massive, massive talent that would love to have a good, decent wide receiver. And I think you'd want a decent wide receiver next to him and a quarterback, which I think you could get more talent into the building. So I think the Giants are just an interesting flyer. So I agree.
Yeah, they're a team to watch, but definitely pay attention to their offseason moves because number one is, obviously Mara, he's been just, that ownership group just hasn't worked out, since the good old days. And then, also, I thought Joe Shane kind of exposed himself and his thought processes behind a lot of decisions, and it didn't really reflect well upon him in that Hard Knocks last year. So, there would be more than just it's almost like there would be more than just a quarterback that would have to that it would need for the Giants to convince me. Like I'd have to see a lot of moves they made around that quarterback that look smart to me and say, okay, maybe they've turned a corner, maybe they're figuring some things out because that team it's just been the same story with them.
But the way Shane got exposed kind of tells me there might be a chance or maybe a greater than 50% chance of doing a splash because he kind of wants to, get himself back in the good graces. So we'll see. Let's talk about Rodgers and Stafford because right now those are kind of the two elder statesman-esque quarterbacks who could be on the move soon. I could say how much in general do either of these guys matter, and we'll start there. Like, compare the two if you can.
I don't think Rodgers moves the needle anymore. Granted, the Jets ended up, they looked like they were a quarterback away. They obviously ended up having a lot more issues than the quarterback. But I just think the current level of Aaron Rodgers is not a guy moving the needle. I think Stafford is kind of on that cusp. I think, but the thing with Stafford is I think he probably moves the needle the most for the team he's already on, the Rams, because we saw it happen. He goes there the first year he goes there, they win a Super Bowl, and he was already old then. And at times it looks like he really can't handle pressure. But strangely enough, I thought down the stretch he actually moved in the pocket better than I've seen him move in the pocket some of these other seasons, and even including his Super Bowl winning season. So I would say Stafford still probably has that potential, but really, I mean, you're looking at the Rams, and I still say the Steelers. I know they're talking about still choosing between Russ and Fields, but I still think the Steelers, given that floor you have with Mike Tomlin, where they're always at 500 or better, given that defense, if they can keep those guys, their key guys together on defense, I think the Steelers would be dangerous even in the AFC because the thing is, if you have a quarterback and you can win those ugly defensive battles, that kind of is a little bit different from some of these other AFC teams in the hunt right now. So, or at least those defensive games let you kind of put you in the running. So like we saw, a team like the Bills, they made it to the AFC Championship. Their defense wasn't that great. Could a Steelers team with a good quarterback beat a team like the Bills in one game in the playoffs? Probably. We've seen it. They've seen them upset the Bills before. So, I think Pittsburgh would be interesting with Stafford. But I don't know. What do you think about just these two guys?
I mean, it's a 5-year age difference. Stafford will be 42 in December. Rodgers will be 42 in December. Stafford's 37. I think overall, Stafford's had a better last few years, even with the injury to Rodgers. And I think Aaron wasn't as bad last year as I think we made it out to be. You look at the final numbers, you look at what he did in certain spots. Now, yeah, he had the Denver game, and there were certain games when he looked really, really bad. But I think at the end of the year, he's going to be a okay addition and nothing more than that to any team. Like when I hear Pittsburgh, I say, okay, 80-1 actually sounds good because I don't think it's going to be Russ. I don't necessarily believe they're just going to say Fields just because Tomlin's seen it. And if he liked what he saw, he would have already said, okay, that might be the direction. He hasn't even hinted at that. So I think he's probably scared to put all of his eggs in that basket. So I think a Stafford to Pittsburgh would probably make it the most interesting to me of any of the quarterbacks. And that's even talking about, we just went through this and said we didn't want to go into the AFC because of obviously all that, garbage and having to go through all those guys. But the 80-1 price with the defense and, to me, Stafford is the interesting play there. It's worth a few dollars, I think, as just an investment point.